Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Nicole Laurent is very much a returning guest on our show, so be sure to check out all of her appearances on episode 248, 343, 438, 538, and 744 of Boundless Body Radio. Nicole Laurent, LMHC, has been a licensed mental health counselor in Washington State for almost 2 decades. Her current practice focuses on helping her clients with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues transition to a ketogenic diet or uses other nutritional therapies to complement their psychotherapy work. She holds several specialized training certifications, allowing her to work with underlying biological factors in mental illness. Nicole works with clients via telehealth and helps people explore medication-free options for their mental health using research and evidence-based nutritional and functional psychiatry so that people can get their lives back without side effects or dependence on big pharma. In 2021, she created mentalhealthketo.com, a blog devoted to educating people about ketogenic diets for mental health and neurological issues. Nicole is also one of 7 pioneers of metabolic psychiatry, recognized by the Baszucki Research Fund and the Milken Institute, and given the Metabolic Mind Award in 2022. Nicole Laurent, my favorite person to interview on this podcast. It's such a joy to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you, Casey. I love coming here. I can't believe I've been on here that many times. I'm surprised, but I guess they all add up over time.
They definitely do. You have been on that many times, and I was stunned to see that the last time was episode 744, which is over a year ago. So it's actually been a while since we've gotten to chat. And you
Yeah.
are always so incredibly busy and always working on stuff. So we always appreciate your time. You give us wonderful advice. You gave me a wonderful piece of advice that I equally love and get super annoyed by the way. So I have
Oh,
to just tell you this. It's
that
both
is
good.
not unusual in talking to me,
There
apparently.
you go. It's both really good and a little bit annoying. It's so funny. So last time we chatted, you told me go onto Google Scholar, type in ketogenic, and it will automatically email me all the amazing studies that are done with the word ketogenic.
hmm
It emails me so much, and I've talked about this so many times on this podcast. It feels like spam. Like it's like every other day, it's another email, and I'm like, there's 3 more studies, there's 5 more studies. I can't go through these. It feels like
Yeah.
a spam email. And so I'm so grateful that you told me that. I'm so grateful that so much study is being done, and I'm
hmm
a little annoyed that my inbox is being filled at the rate that it is.
It's true. It happens so fast. So I'm working on an article now, and it's really hard to get something through peer review without having to completely update your manuscript with something new that came out during that period, both in the construction of the draft and through the peer review process. Ketogenic research is coming out just at a furious pace, and it does feel a little bit like spam when you feel like you really need to read these research articles. Yeah.
It's a lot. It's an awful
Mhm.
lot. And yeah, that's such a good point. In the introduction, as we were getting you, brought onto the show, we left out so much. It's such an abbreviated introduction. You're always working on so much, and we said nothing about all the research papers that you have been involved with. And I just want to ask you, like globally, generally speaking, now that you've been involved with doing this with patients, being involved in some of these studies, doing as much writing as you're doing, what can you say as far as speaking to like the strength of the arguments? Like when you started your blog back in 2021, you felt very confident that what you were doing was helping so many people. There was research out then. There's a lot more now. Tell us about the journey that you have had, like kind of in the front row of seeing all this research, and does it feel even more true now, the power of a ketogenic diet for mental health?
Yes. So when I first started that blog, I'm pretty sure I was one of the only ones that was talking about it in that way. And I had actually, it was a huge relief when Metabolic Mind came on the scene and it's like, we're going to educate everybody about all these underlying factors and they kind of took that role off of me, which I was actually very relieved because I think that that was such an important role because if people don't understand the intervention or what some of the underlying mechanisms are, they aren't getting the research trickled down to them in a way that they can understand, then it's all pointless because people are not going to learn about it or they're not going to be able to understand it well enough to put it into practice or to self-advocate with it with their doctors. And so that was actually a huge relief because I think that through like a little bit of an evolution, I think I've kind of come to understand that what's in my head as a clinician is not obvious to everybody. Like you kind of feel like, oh, well, of course everybody kind of knows or understands that this would be a factor or this would be a consideration or whatever, but that's really not the case. And for a lot of people who aren't getting in this space that think they don't necessarily have anything to offer, you should maybe gently challenge that about yourself because now because that has been kind of taken off my plate or my urgency that this information has to get out has been reduced. It really has freed me up to really write a lot of conceptual analysis. I have time now to write up these case reports as they present themselves to me. Um, it really allows me to expand out in that area in a way that I think is much more useful or helpful at this point because thank God Metabolic Mind is on the scene to kind of like to just really help people.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful and it's amazing to see. And I want to know also in your mind from what you've observed, you go to all kinds of different conferences. For example, you go to low carb conferences, you also go to general, mental health conferences. How quickly or slowly is this message getting out to general population? Like is it still something that I mean, it's interesting because I almost hear it in the questions that you're asked when you're hosting on other podcasts with hosts that maybe are just like new to this. They're just learning about a ketogenic diet for mental health. This
Mhm.
diet that was good for weight loss can also do all these other things. Like, what do you observe in the general population or even the mental health population as far as receiving the knowledge about ketogenic therapies?
I think, I'm always very optimistic in my lens about how I when I interact with people. And so, maybe the same interview, someone sees something different than I do. But what I always zero in on is people's curiosity. So once you get it through to them that this is being used for this purpose, people become very curious about, well, why would this work? Why is this something that works potentially? And they become just very curious about it. And anytime someone is very curious about something, that means that they are trying to assimilate new information in their existing schema about themselves, others, or the world, or how things work. And then that means that they are much more open and interested in it and will consider it and will tell others about it. And even if they don't completely understand, but they're perfectly capable of completely understanding. And so I think it's really, I think, and even in the psychology field, so I'm publishing more in psychology specific journals. And when I go through the peer review process, often they really want me to expand my papers out into all the underlying mechanisms by which ketogenic diets can work for mental illness. And often I have to say, oh, no, no, that's not this kind of paper. There are lots of those papers over in psychiatry that I can reference for that purpose. But that means the psychologists who are peer reviewing my papers are actually super interested and want to understand this better. So I'm not sure that that is a dissemination. I'm thinking that would be really hard to kind of measure, but I feel like there's just such powerful momentum around this more and more. Shamani Sethi and several co-authors just published something in Nature about this, which is the highest tier journal. So that is it's just really good, Casey. I think that it's people are more and more open to it. I continue I'm as optimistic, possibly more so than the first episode when you asked me a similar question around that.
Okay, good. That's really great to hear. And I want to talk about a consensus statement that you were involved in here in a second. But before we go there, I thought it was really interesting. You were asked a question on another interview, and you pointed out a difference that I had not really considered. And I'd like to talk about, like you said, what are some of the benefits of a ketogenic diet as far as mental health goes, like how that works. We've talked about that before, but I think it's a good thing to kind of revisit. But that you were asked a question, and you had to point out that there's a difference between nutritional psychology and metabolic psychology. So can you talk about what that difference is? I was not really aware of this. I hadn't thought about it like this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I can't remember that particular podcast that you're talking about, but um oh, yes, nutritional psychology and oh yes. So I think more of it is nutritional psychiatry and or psychology and metabolic psychiatry or psychology. And so they're a little bit interchanging. But yes, so nutritional psychiatry and metabolic psychiatry are related but different. So, psychology or psychiatry really kind of focuses on things like gut microbiome composition, what foods can improve, mental illness, that sort of thing. It's very much the blueberries help with Alzheimer's kind of thing. It's very much a lot of associational studies, stuff like that. And in nutritional psychiatry and psychology, you know, micronutrient status, of course, matters a great deal. And there's much to offer in nutritional psychiatry and psychology. Absolutely. Metabolic psychiatry and psychology, of course, are very, very interested in micronutrient status because you have to have adequate micronutrient status or optimal even for mitochondrial function. All those pathways that make your neurotransmitters, they use micronutrients. And so they'll, of course, look at the metabolic effects of micronutrient deficiency or insufficiencies in metabolic psychiatry. But really, it's about a shift. It's a shift in energy. It's an increase in mitochondrial function. It is thinking about the energy dynamics of the brain and the body and how that changes everything, the whole landscape, and how that addresses mental illness in a way that nutritional psychiatry and psychology perhaps cannot. So there's many people who have taken a multivitamin and played with probiotics and attempted to shift their gut microbiome and have tried different, blueberries and salmon and increasing different foods to try to increase their health or their mental health. And many people get better that way, but there are people where that true metabolic shift that is part of the toolkit of metabolic psychiatry is really required.
Yeah. Well, all those things sound really nice. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, as you're listing those things, like, that's all really great. That doesn't even like touch the power of metabolic psychiatry when it comes to like a ketogenic diet. So how do you kind of get that message across that, like, what we're talking about as far as metabolic ketogenic psychiatry, how do you talk about the power of what it can truly do for people?
Yeah, so the way I kind of think about that is yes, maybe there has been in the past individuals with seizures that have increased their micronutrient intake and got better. I haven't read a case study about that. Um, but a ketogenic diet is a metabolic intervention that can stop seizures when all other medications fail. And focusing on your blueberry intake and your salmon intake and taking a multivitamin will not. And so that's kind of the best way to kind of get through to people that this is a totally different level of intervention.
Yeah. You were also asked a little bit about exogenous ketones. So we know that the body can burn fat as a fuel source and produce ketones that are water soluble. It can be a great fuel for the brain. We also know we can make ketones, or we can have, different oils, for example, like MCT oil that is very ketogenic. They're not
Mhm.
ketones, but they turn into ketones quite quickly. Where are we at as far as like the latest research of like people that maybe don't want to completely change their diet? They don't want to go fully ketogenic. Chris Palmer always argues that the diet is really challenging for people and that kind of thing, and not everybody's going to do it. I like to contrast that with the way you approach it and what you've told us in the past, that what you're going through is already very, very difficult, and changing your diet it's not going to be that hard. I love that approach. But anyway, like when it comes to research around exogenous ketones or ways our body can produce ketones, what is the difference? How do you explain the difference between those two things to somebody?
You know, um, there's a metabolic shift, a true metabolic shift that happens when you do the diet that I think changes things differently than just adding exogenous ketones. Like I know a lot, and Chris would say this too. You can not do a ketogenic diet and you can take lots of exogenous ketones and you may or may not get treatment benefits. And we don't know who needs to be on a ketogenic diet with exogenous ketones and who can just get away with taking exogenous ketones. Like we don't have the answers to that question anymore. Um, and it's the diet like you said, yeah, the diet is challenging, but it's not as challenging as having, having these really terrible mental illness symptoms, and low energy and feeling like crap all the time. And so, um, yeah, I just have such a different experience with it. I don't even think about it as being that difficult. I mean, I acknowledge that people's capacity is low when they start the ketogenic diet, and that makes it feel very overwhelming. But again, being debilitated by anxiety every morning, first thing when you wake up, that's much harder than beginning to change the items in your kitchen,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I have a very different kind of viewpoint.
Yeah. And again, I don't think they're contrasting viewpoints. I think both of you can be right. I think Chris can say this is going to be challenging for people. Not everybody can do it. You can say like I think it's not that incredibly hard. And
Yeah.
I'm not treating people. I don't. Chris sees people. You see people. I don't treat people. But through this podcast, I've been able to talk to a lot of people, and maybe it's just because I'm talking to the people that did do the diet, and so it's a little bit
Successfully.
self-selecting there.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree with you a little bit more that like these people, like maybe it was difficult in the beginning, but it wasn't that hard, and it was like they were getting better the whole time. It's not like they fixed it immediately overnight, but it felt a
Right.
little bit better one day, and then the next day, and the next day, and then all of a sudden you're eating delicious food, and it's pretty simple and not that expensive. And I kind of see that experience a little bit more than the people that you tried it and it was just so overwhelming.
Yeah. And Chris talks about that. Like 3 weeks in, people are like, screw you, I'm not doing this diet. This is too hard. And he tells them, just stay with it for 3 months and you will be telling me how easy this diet is. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, he totally knows.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk about your recent involvement in this consensus paper that came out.
Mhm.
What was the origin of this? What was the goal? I kind of read through everything and saw all the different steps, but how did you get involved, and what was the goal of this paper?
Yeah, so I was asked to be one of the people to contribute in the first few rounds where we came up with the questions in such a way that we could then put them out into the world with other practitioners that specifically use it for this purpose. And so yeah, I was just asked to be on it, and it was wonderful. And the Delphi consensus, the point of it was to have some kind of agreement among clinicians and people who actually use the diet hands-on with individuals that can help guide. Um, Now, it's really important to not think about the Delphi consensus as guidelines, as clinical guidelines, because that's not what was published. A clinical guideline is something different that goes through a different process. A Delphi consensus can be used as part of the many references and resources that are used to create a true um, a clinical document, guideline document. So that's important to kind of understand. But yeah, it was a great experience, and I think that the level of consensus that we reached was actually very encouraging because it means that it isn't just done willy-nilly. It's not a whole bunch of different practitioners who think it should be done many, many, many different ways. So we've seen patterns as clinicians that we agree upon where we see better outcomes than others, and we have many of the same considerations that we draw upon when we decide whether to use it or not use it or recommend it and how we do so.
When was this project started? And you don't have to read the names, but who were the other people that were involved? I don't expect you to know every single person exactly off the top of your head right now, but like who was involved and when did this get started?
Oh, gosh, I can't remember when it started. Honestly, it's been a little while. It's a research methodology that a lot of peer reviewers and a lot of journals are not familiar with. And so the time it took between getting it done and written up and submitting it and finding the correct journal, that actually took quite a while. But it was Georgia Eade spearheaded the writing up of the manuscript, which was a huge job. Many, many thanks to her. And so my other co-authors were Matthew Bernstein, which people know from the Accord program at Ellenhorn, and Lori Calabrese, and she's a great metabolic psychiatrist. Touch Points 180, I think, is her practice. Ian Campbell, who's that lovely man from Edinburgh, which I learned it's pronounced Edinburgh instead of Edinburgh.
That's right.
Um, yeah, took me a while, but yeah. So everyone knows him. He's part of the metabolic psychiatry hub there, and he does great research on bipolar disorder for it. And then, of course, the super famous Chris Palmer was there. Shabani Sethi from the Metabolic Psychiatry Clinic at Stanford. So basically, the mother of the term metabolic psychiatry is Shabani Sethi, for people who don't know. And Beth Supet-Kania, who is kind of a super famous epilepsy dietitian, who has like, I think 30 or 40 years experience using ketogenic metabolic therapy for therapeutic purposes. So it was a great bunch of authors, to start getting those consensus statements as such in a nice solid place, so that then it could be sent out to other clinicians who use it for the same purpose.
That is the who's who of the metabolic psychiatry world. You guys are all the cool kids sitting at the cool table in the cafeteria for sure. That's
You
an
are
amazing group.
you are also invited to our table. Yes, come to our table and eat your lunch with us. We are excited to have you. Yeah.
It's very kind, but I'm a little intimidated. I might be a table away.
Oh no, we'll bring you in. We
Uh,
can share our what can we share? I was gonna say our peanut butter sandwich, but we're low carb, so we
Can't have
wouldn't.
that. Yeah, some burger patties, maybe if we can
Yeah,
scrounge some up.
yeah.
Okay, so again, you're trying to get a consensus statement out to other clinicians so that they can read it. What were the statements and the agreements you guys came to? Like, what were some of the conclusions you made?
Oh, yeah. So those are in the research article as published in Frontiers in Nutrition. But some of them were that a therapeutic level of ketosis, I think, is between 1.5 and 3. Maybe it was 4 back then. I mean, it's still in that range. Some people do well. And just, 20 net grams of carbohydrates is another one that we said that, everybody can mostly get into good levels of ketosis. Sorry, I'm trying to manage my cat in behavior in between. Maybe I
Your
can get
cat
her
is
to
always
not.
welcome on our podcast.
All the pets on your podcast, probably, yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, and so yeah, so the consensus number 9 was BHB concentration of zero point 0.5 indicates a state of ketosis, but many people will require levels to be consistently maintained at 1 millimole or higher. So it gives a little bit of a understanding that for some people, higher ketone levels might be better. And a trial of KMT is considered adequate. A state of ketosis should be maintained for at least 3 consecutive months before drawing conclusions about its effectiveness. So again, just like on medications, if you're going on and off your medication for a trial, you can't tell whether it's working. Same thing with a ketogenic diet. It has to be a kind of a consistent run. And it was at least 3 months. I see better at 4 months if people do it for a good 4 months. Sometimes that works even better. The longer you do it, kind of the better outcomes for many people. And so yeah, there was a lot of different little things like um, individuals with like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia who decline, don't get better, can't access, can't tolerate, or who have not sufficiently benefited from first line treatments really should be offered a trial if there isn't some big contraindication going on. And the consensus was that it should be considered as an adjunct therapy to first line treatments at this time for those 3 different disorders. So there's a few different pieces in there. Um, and of course, obvious things, right? Prior to consideration of KMT, the people should get to have a thorough medical and psychiatric history to assess for the presence of, different contraindications for ketogenic diets in general. So it was just a really good basic one. Oh, and there was also talk about blood work. So baseline assessment should include a CBC, um, a CMP, which is a comprehensive metabolic panel, fasting lipid profile, a vitamin D level, a B12 level, and a carnitine panel is recommended for all the reasons we've kind of talked about, how carnitine is important for someone's ability to make ketones from free fatty acids. And if we're doing a treatment in which ketone levels seem to matter, by golly, we better have sufficient carnitine on hand for them or sufficient levels as they go into their ketogenic diet.
Got it. So yeah, there's a lot of specific things in there, and the consensus, obviously, that all of you came to in agreement with all the time and experience that all of you had. I do have a few more questions. First of all, you mentioned contraindications. What would those contraindications be?
They're often inborn errors of metabolism are kind of the biggest ones, and people are often very aware of whether they have that going on or not. A lot of the contraindications um, that we used to think of as contraindications are not necessarily contraindications anymore. I'm trying to remember I don't think we went into too much detail about. Let me find it. Monitoring standards. Again, this was done a while ago in terms of that, but some of them pulled from the research literature are things like um, kidney cancer, melanoma, breastfeeding has been talked about as an absolute contraindication. But I do know epilepsy dietitians who work with women who have epilepsy who are breastfeeding, and they do some form of a low carbohydrate diet, for example. Diabetes type 1 without endocrinology approval or supervision, or I would say education, being a big Andrew Kutnick fan, right? And so some of these that are reported in the paper, these are things that have been considered contraindications in the research literature in the past that as we do more research may not actually be a full or absolute contraindication. It's just something that the medical field has to kind of work on, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say somebody is listening to this, or somebody just comes across the consensus statement. They're not a medical practitioner. They've experienced mental health difficulties in their life. Maybe they're seeing somebody, maybe they're not. If they are seeing somebody, maybe that somebody is not really aware of ketogenic diets, or they're not supportive of ketogenic diets. They don't think they work, whatever. But this person is motivated, again, dealing with whatever mental health disorders they're dealing with, and they just want to do it on their own. Would you be very concerned with somebody who just decides to do this on your own? Because again, through the podcast, I talk to so many people who, of course, say all the things that we say, which is work with a practitioner. You have to be very careful about medications and be very cautious and step down slowly and work with somebody. There's a ton of people who are not, and they're just kind of doing it on their own.
I
And they're
know.
of course, being cautious and warning people, don't do what I did, but there's a lot of people that did what they did.
Mhm.
Do you get concerned, if somebody just listens to this and is hey, I'm just going to do this on my own, and I'm not even going to tell my doctor? What are your concerns there?
Yeah, that's so hard um because yeah, the some of the early case studies on schizophrenia, it was yeah, they had a doctor and they were on medications, and early on maybe the doctor didn't understand what how medications and ketogenic diets interact or don't interact or whatever, and through grace they made it kind of through. And some people don't track macros and all that kind of stuff. They just use a low carb list, and suddenly they are, recovered from schizophrenia, that they were told they were never going to recover from. So I completely get that. The the issue is that we kind of know more now because it's been used more and there's more clinical understanding around it. And so what my concern um, is that if people transition down very, very quickly into a ketogenic diet, they often will get some pretty nasty electrolyte imbalances. And for me, what that means is, oh no, they're going to say this ketogenic diet makes me tired and makes my symptoms worse, and I'm going to go off of it. That's the danger right there, or one of the dangers, right? They could get increased symptoms because of electrolyte imbalances. They could get worse. Sometimes for some people transitioning down, their symptoms get worse before they get better. And also there's the piece where a lot of people are on antipsychotics. It's a weird statement to have to say. A lot of people are on antipsychotics. A lot of people are on antipsychotics for things that do not involve psychosis, for example. But they are. And when people move to a high fat diet, that actually changes how those medications are metabolized and they can become stronger and people can get more side effects. So if I'm on a ketogenic diet and I've increased my fat intake and I am suddenly more sedated and feel more exhausted, I'm going to be like, oh, this ketogenic diet doesn't work. It makes me more tired, when really how my medication has been metabolized changed. The other thing is that people will get potentiation effects and need to have their medications reduced because they will start to get side effects from the medications at the same dosage that they used to take that didn't cause any problems. Like think of the Danone study, right? There was a significant amount of psychiatric inpatients who required or needed their medications reduced. And luckily, those patients had, a wonderful psychiatrist who understood that, right? But many people do not, and they will start to get symptoms early, later on and think, oh, my ketogenic diet has stopped working for me. Um, and and they will not adjust their medications down. They will just stop their ketogenic diet. Or additionally concerning, possibly more so, they will go into their psychiatrist's office with these potentiation symptoms that actually just require a reduction down in their medication and be put on more medication. And so you see, it's not, I mean, so yes, many of your listeners have just done the deed and been successful and made it through, but you can see that it is a quagmire of considerations, and that people actually do much better with support and working with a practitioner who can help them kind of look for these little things as they come up. And they don't come up on time. They don't come up on some schedule that we can warn people about ahead of time. You will get potentiation at this time. No, that's not how it works. We can say about this week or this week. So that's what I mean. The real risk is that someone is going to give up on the ketogenic diet and decide it doesn't work for them, when really, if they had just worked with a practitioner to some degree, they might have been able to stay on the diet long enough and had enough support around making medication decisions and thoughts about that where they could have been successful. And then there's also the piece about hyperbolic tapering. Some people will need an adjustment down in their medication and get an adjustment down, but it will be a unskillful reduction. And I'm not apologizing for using that term, because there's a lot of psychiatrists who believe that they are very good at tapering that are not, and they can cause a rebound psychosis. That is 100% from the poor tapering practice that just occurred with that person. And what is that person going to think? Oh, well, I guess this means I need to stay on my medication. Right? So there's just so many ways that this could go wrong, or that assumptions or conclusions can be made that are not in the best interest of the patient. So while you got all those kind of people going rogue, right, and doing it on their own, it's really not what we recommend, and we don't recommend it for a reason, because we see all this stuff happening in this population.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's all really well explained. I'm glad you went there with that question. And like you mentioned earlier, it's not like you're saying we are recommending this diet to be used in lieu of medications or before you try medications. This is something that you can do as an adjunct alongside and see if it works, and give it the time and make sure you're in a certain level of ketosis. Like you're being very cautious about how you're recommending this. Is not to replace anything else that's being done. It's just like, try this, for free. You have
Yeah.
to eat something. Like, why not just eat these certain foods and see what it does?
Yeah, and that's definitely one way to do it. But I'll also tell you, Casey, that I have a lot of people with serious mental illness who come to me that are not on any medications, and they are not on any medications because the side effects are so debilitating, that they just simply can't or won't or refuse to, which by golly, doesn't that make that sound unsustainable, potentially much more unsustainable as a treatment than a ketogenic diet? And so I would never say someone has to take, you know what I mean? That's the, so medication can be very stabilizing when someone is in acute psychosis. But the more I work with actual patients, the more I'm understanding by listening to their lived experience that for many people, medication is not something that they wish to have to use if they absolutely do not have to use it. And so for many people out there are using a ketogenic diet as a treatment. I will say they are very careful about it. The smart ones are not like, oh, I'm eating from a low carb food list. This is going to totally, keep me well. For some people, that is not the case. They really have to look at it like a treatment and watch their macros and watch their carb count and manage the diet the way it needs to be managed for some people using it for neurological purposes. So, yeah.
Got it. Well, okay. So, the consensus statement lands in Frontiers, which is a very good journal by my understanding. What has been the response so far? Like, what have you noticed? Have people asked you questions, been curious about it, reached out in any way? Like, what have you kind of ascertained as far as the response to putting this out there?
It's a big clinical milestone, really, for it to be published, for a consensus statement like this to be published. And there's been really a lot of interest. There's, Metabolic Mind on Instagram, for example. People are commenting and getting copies and reading it. And one of my favorite things to do is to go on Frontiers where the actual article is, and you look at demographics, and anybody can look at the metrics. And in the metrics, there's this tab about demographics, and you get to see all over the world the number of opens or downloads or whatever, you know what I mean, of where people are watching this. Looking at it. And so you actually kind of get to see it spread around the world. And that's kind of my favorite part of publishing any article, is just kind of seeing, what the interest is, I guess, is the biggest thing. But yeah, it's such a well done article, and it's so clear that I haven't gotten too many questions about it. Maybe some of the other authors have, but I haven't. It's very clear, and hopefully my wish is that it's very helpful for people, those people in those countries where they don't have any guidance, and they do have people with mental illness wanting to use it as a treatment. They'll be able to access this and get just some basic guidelines that are
I
not
didn't even think about it.
not clinical guidelines, but basic guides clinically that they can follow at this time.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. I didn't even think about the global outreach and how it's so needed everywhere, not just around here in an English speaking country. So yeah, that's amazing. Super cool work. It's always so funny as you and I are prepping for these conversations because, we'll shoot messages back and forth, and you'll shoot me like 10 different messages of all these different new studies and all these things you're working on. And you're always so busy. And there's so much research coming out that you're working on. We wanted to talk about a randomized control trial today, which for me, in preparation for this conversation, kind of got lost a little bit. I know we brought it up and talked about it in the past, but I kind of forgot about it. So will you remind me the randomized clinical trial that you wanted to bring up and discuss today?
Yeah, and we can even put a little link to it in the show
That would be
notes
great.
if you want.
Yeah.
It's published in JAMA, and its title is A Ketogenic Diet for Treatment-Resistant Depression, a Randomized Clinical Trial. And it was written by three authors, Gao, Kirk, and Knight. And it came out of I think Oxford University. And the reason I wanted to kind of talk about this is that there was I want your listeners to kind of understand how to evaluate ketogenic trials as they come out. And otherwise, because there's really a lot of variability in how these trials are ran and what's done and what isn't done, that for many people it's hard to evaluate these studies, right? So my interest in talking about this came after this trial came out, and it was on X. And there was a gentleman who was basically slamming the study, right? Even though the study actually did find that the ketogenic group had better outcomes. So it suggested that ketogenic diets may be effective as an adjunct treatment. And after 6 weeks, the improvement was greater in the ketogenic group than the control group. And that's absolutely true. But the individual was saying that it was completely underwhelming because there was also large non-specific improvements in both groups. And he was saying that there's a small between group difference that fell short of what would be considered clinically meaningful. So, yes, something can be statistically meaningful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's clinically meaningful for the individuals doing the intervention. And that difference didn't survive sensitivity analysis in the statistical piece. Um, they had a hard time, or they didn't show a dose response relationship. And so this clinician was saying that it makes it hard to argue that this is a ketosis treating depression outcome, right? And he talked about that there was also confounding variables in how much support was given and in what way for something called a Hawthorne effect, which is where both groups improve because there's a certain amount of attention that's being given to each one. So the whole purpose of RCTs is to try to tease that stuff out to see if there's actually a treatment effect, right? And so, my response to that after at first I was like, oh, what is he saying? Right? Because I hadn't actually had a chance to read the study. But, when I read the study, I could completely see what he was saying. And so, I want people to kind of understand the nuances about how these studies are ran and what choices are made or not made, right? Um, and so one of the considerations about the study, because your people are going to encounter these types of criticisms about ketogenic diets on different social media platforms and particularly about the studies. And so if there's any problems with these studies that make things muddy or unclear, obviously the results are going to be underwhelming, right? And I want people to understand that this is a very difficult thing to study, ketogenic diets for mental illness. Like it's really a lot of different potential confounders that have to be controlled for an RCT, right? To actually be able to give us a clear picture. So, yeah, that's basically why I really wanted to kind of talk about it.
Got it. Okay. And what comes to my mind when you say randomized controlled trial is that is the strongest form of evidence we have. That is the strongest kind of, trial that we can do. Is that correct?
Well, it's supposed to be, yeah. It's right there on top of the evidence-based pyramid, or what's been adopted or called the evidence-based pyramid. And yes, it's supposed to be the highest, most rigorous type of study, research study that would show treatment effects, make it clear whether treatment effects were happening or not based on whatever intervention is being studied. But please let me remind everyone that studies are created by human beings and not robots who are able, and also it's very difficult to blind people to different things so that they know they're not being studied, or that sort of thing. So it's really complicated. So let's kind of talk about some of the issues with this study so that people can take the outcomes into consideration and contextualize them based on how this particular study was done. So, the first thing is that they used urine strips as opposed to blood BHB levels. And so they had participants test first morning urine at least just twice weekly and record the results and report them back during weekly sessions. And so twice a week, that is not very often, right? We know, like, we've seen this done really, really well in some other studies, like Shabani Sethi's clinical study with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. She had lots of different levels of adherence that she was figuring out what the treatment effects were. That was not an RCT, but it was very clear who was adherent and who was not because there was more frequent testing going on. And the type of testing going on with blood BHB is much less prone to errors or false readings. Ketone urine sticks have a lot of problems. If you're dehydrated, your ketones look higher. And if you've overdrank water, they look lower. And a morning ketone level is often doesn't show up well because people have the dawn effect, for example. And this was only done twice weekly. And so there's that piece, like how compliant were these individuals actually? And then the other piece I think that matters is that for the first 6 weeks, the ketogenic diet arm was supported with 3 prepared ketogenic meals a day plus snacks, which totally understandable. And those were provided for free along with the urine strips and weekly support sessions. This is very different than what happened in the Decker study with the college students. And maybe that couldn't be done the same way because this was the RCT, right? But in the Decker study with college students, they gave them prepared meals so they could kind of see what a ketogenic meal looked like. And then they weaned people off of them so they could basically learn how to manage the diet on their own, right? Um, and I totally understand why it was done differently in this RCT because they said they designed the trial to kind of maximize the short-term adherence by providing this really intensive support with like, here's your food, eat it, right? You don't even have to think about it, which makes perfect sense. But, here's the thing. When all that support stopped, very few people continued on their ketogenic diet, right? So 21 out of 44 in the ketogenic diet arm reported not continuing the diet at all at week 12, which was just 6 weeks after support ended. And that's unfortunate because now what people are going to say based on this RCT is, look, there's evidence that it's unsustainable. Well, if they aren't being taught the very basics about you know what I mean, how to continue the diet, then we really, that's really not an argument for that. So I'm concerned about that's going to add to that argument that really isn't necessarily founded. And there's that whole question about participant food tracking, right? And I'm actually writing a paper about this now, but I've been thinking more and more about if we don't treat people how to weigh their food and track their food and master how many carbohydrates are in what amount and how much fat is in what amount and how much protein is in this meal, if we don't give them those kind of basic tools to think about their ketogenic diet as a treatment, how does that affect their ability to stay on the diet long enough to actually experience treatment effects? How does that affect ketone levels that study participants are getting? Like there's a whole thing about this. Where is the potential mastery? Maybe, or maybe it's burden. Maybe asking people to track actually has worse outcomes. I don't know. These are questions that we aren't asking because basically what we've done is we've adopted what epilepsy has done for adults looking to use the ketogenic diet for seizure control with a modified Atkins, which doesn't require the same macronutrient tracking as we see in a 4-to-1 ratio for children for epilepsy, right? So there's all these clinical questions that kind of go with it. But, basically the people in the ketogenic arm, they were just instructed to consume less than 30 grams of carbohydrate daily. And so protein was adjusted to help them to kind of stay in ketosis, but where is that? Yeah. And because they're doing the urine strips, the adherence couldn't be tightly verified. So even the authors admit that the ketone testing was insufficient to reliably detect lapses or distinguish partial adherence from non-adherence. So again, we have an RCT whose goal was to determine whether a ketogenic diet would be an effective treatment, but they were unable to actually verify true adherence. And there's other clues in this paper where you really get the feeling that perhaps adherence was not very good, right? And therefore, the outcomes of this RCT really go into question. So there was participants were talking about guilt and lapses. And the guilt and the lapses information appeared only in the qualitative supplement 2. Participants described feeling intense guilt after eating non-ketogenic diet foods, feeling they had failed after lapses, mood worsening associated with perceived dietary failure, and cycles of restriction, lapse, guilt, and stopping altogether. And therefore, as I was reading this, I was questioning adherence at all. And so you can see how even though this is an RCT that says a ketogenic diet was tested as a treatment for this mental illness, you can see that even if something says RCT on it, there can be so many problems with how that RCT was done that it doesn't really provide a level of evidence that is useful for people to make treatment decisions, and that these outcomes of these studies that have all these issues, many clinicians are not going to dig down deep into a study the way I did to look at this, and that these studies that are not well designed, there's a lot at stake. These studies really have to be well designed, and these studies really have to be really thought out. And we, as a metabolic psychiatry field, I think we need to get down and dirty and in the nitty-gritty about the ways people are taught these diets or not, and the decisions that are made about who gets to learn to track and who doesn't. And so it was just really it was just a really difficult study to watch go burning through social media as proof that ketogenic diets are not a good treatment for this particular disorder. And, in all fairness, also the electrolyte protocol was not communicated. We don't know how much early physical symptoms like lethargy and dizziness were handled, and how that motivated or unmotivated people to stay on the diet, right? So there's all these different pieces, but in all fairness to the researchers, it's very difficult to do an RCT on ketogenic diets and ketogenic metabolic therapy. These are all really brilliant researchers. And also they're trailblazers because they were trying to conduct an RCT really early. Like, it took a long time to get this data, and they also probably didn't have the benefit of having a lot of input, right? From knowledgeable practitioners around it. And even if you're a great clinician with KMT, it doesn't mean that you understand how to do a research study. So super big kudos to them for this. And people need to be very cautious in interpreting data, and they need to kind of dig deep before they make these decisions about whether something has efficacy or not.
Wow. Well, I certainly didn't see it making the rounds on social media, so I consider myself lucky there. But when you talk about the study design, I mean, you lost me at P-strips. Like, those are a nice tool for somebody when they're first getting started, because they can show whether somebody is wasting ketones through the urine. But we all know that over time, even if somebody's being very adherent to the diet, they're not going to work. Your body doesn't make as many and it uses more. And so everything kind of levels out, and you're not going to detect as many wasted ketones in the urine as you would when somebody's first starting the diet. So right there, you're already using a method to measure ketones that really, to me, is just not very valid.
Yeah, and this was a short trial. So, I would have even been happy. I would have been happier if it had just been daily. Ketone urine strips are not very expensive. There's really no reason why that could not have been a daily measurement. And it even could have been a daily measurement twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon would have kind of sealed the deal, right? And provided that kind of feedback. So, yeah.
Okay. And again, this is going to be very general, but you've done so much work around this now and seen so many people and contributed to so many studies. uh, you're so good at this. So I just want you to you look at this study, you see the results, contrast that generally speaking to the people that you work with. Does it come down to those kind of really practical things? Like, do you find a lot of your work is like this is how you cook something, this is the way you follow a recipe, that this is what you shop for, the low carbohydrate list, here's how you weigh things, like what things do you have to do for most people to get the better compliance that you're getting with your people that some people may be missing out on?
Yeah, so yes, I mean I do have people who are coming into their ketogenic diet very overwhelmed and lower functioning and that sort of thing. And yes, I absolutely will give them a ketogenic food list and say, let's eat off there for a while, right? And we start there. But ultimately, I really do want them to learn how to master the diet in a way that if they start to have problems with the diet later, they know how to weigh their food, they know how to track their food in an app, and they know how to get that information to a ketogenic diet professional because that's really the best way that that ketogenic diet professional is going to be able to troubleshoot with them and help them get their ketones up or help them get back on track. So I think about the mastery that I can offer them. So many people feel very powerless that have mental illness, and so many of the treatments are not particularly, they're not particularly active. They're take this pill, they're show up for therapy, right? And while we encourage people to interact and participate in therapy, sometimes their functioning is really low, and it's all they can do to kind of show up and try to be present as best they can. So I really think that there might, I suspect, I don't know because we have not researched it in metabolic psychiatry, whether if we teach people to track to what level, is it good enough to have a dietitian look at your written down food records every week to eyeball it and see if you're doing well? Or is there benefit to actually teaching adults capable of learning tracking? And how do we determine whether someone's capable of learning tracking or not? Is that coming from reality or is that coming from practitioner biases about what people with mental illness are capable of? Right? Or is it coming from their own prejudices about the fact that they would not enjoy tracking and therefore I shouldn't ask you to track, right? So there's all these really important clinical questions that are not being asked yet in the field that I think would be really helpful. But I find that the people, remember, I have a nonprofit and I bring in low income and government disabled people due to psychiatric mental illness into my program. And I tell them, you must learn to track. And by golly, they all learn to do it. I think almost every single one of them. There might be a few here and there where it hasn't been practical and they've gotten better regardless, right? But I think it's important because it really helps them master the treatment in a way that I think is good for them. I think it's psychological treatment work to learn how to master something and to have activity towards it. Again, I don't have any research to confirm that. It's just what I see, and it makes me curious in the research literature about it. And I'd like to see researchers look at that more carefully.
It just highlights something that you have told me in the past that's always stuck with me, that like this is, you know, keto for weight loss is great. It's fun. It's awesome. This is not goofing around keto. This is not keto 6 days a week and you can do whatever you want on Sunday or whatever. Like this is really serious and the stakes are so high. And, talking to so many people out there, including, the couple, your patients that you worked with, and hearing their story about how they reversed out of this stuff and they got so angry at first that nobody ever told them about this. You see the stories of people that are healing from serious mental disorders and how much they were suffering. And, to finally find something that doesn't have crazy side effects. It's minimally effective, like some of the medications they've been on. They don't have to be on combinations of medications, and they figure out how to do this. It's just such an amazing contrast in their quality of life. So the stakes could not be higher when it comes to some of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. What gets you excited about the future? What are you working on? I know you're always working on many, many different things all at once. It sounds like you finally got your travel plans down just a little bit so that you can finish a few things up. What gets you most excited about the future?
Oh, yeah. really been enjoying writing conceptual analysis lately. So you'll see some of those going through peer review, hopefully, and getting published. I am still working on my recovery. I feel embarrassment that I'm still working on my recovery study with all the interviews and coding those. I have really good excuses though about why I am not done with that study because I keep getting inspired to do other things that feel eminently kind of important. Not that the recovery study is not important, but my goal is to get that done by the end of this year and get that in peer review. So that is my hope. Um, but yes, and then my nonprofit is been amazing. I love, love, love working with the individuals who enter through my nonprofit into my online program. My online program is doing really, really well. And I get to watch people recover all the time and do really well in that format. And the online program is really, I think, superior to individual consultation because there is a peer component in the live Q&As that I think is the secret sauce. And so the online program, also, there's no time limits in the online program, so people can work through the lessons and work through the changes at their own pace, which I think is also superior to a lot of the different models. So yeah, I'm just really enjoying my work. There's going to be some fundraising going on for the nonprofit that allows people to get education and support in ketogenic metabolic therapy who are low income or government disabled. We work with people from all over the world. And that's really exciting because, like, what's the point of all this if people can't access it and get to it and get the help that they need to implement it? So, yeah, I have so many good things. I have coloring books out that support the nonprofit. Um, and I just kind of I listen to my intuition and I go in the places where I see a need and I try to fill it and then I just watch everything unfold. So that's just kind of how I roll.
It's amazing. Well, you are the best, and it's always so cool to see all the things you're working on, and to get to chat with you, kind of like once a year, twice a year, to get updates and all the points of clarification that you make, and how much progress you're making, and your optimism is absolutely infectious. And so, I'd love our time together, and I'm so grateful that even though you're very, very busy, that you took some time to be on our show again today. And yeah, remind our audience where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work.
Yeah. Mentalhealthketo.com, all one word. And there's like an about me page or something, and all my publications are updated there regularly. And yeah, sometimes on my Metabolic Mind on interviews and stuff like that too. So there's also the YouTube channel with Nicole Laurent, LMHC. There's a list of podcasts that I'm on there, playlist. So yeah, I'm all over the place. So, and I'm happy to interact with people and help them find the right program or provider for them.
Amazing. One of my favorite programs that you run is the brain fog recovery program. And so, just important to reiterate, we've talked about this in the past, but if you are feeling like you're in your 30s, you're in your 40s, you're forgetting a few things, not a big deal. This is just what happens. And it's absolutely not the case. Now is the time to kind of tackle that. And your program is amazing as far as that goes. So, we're just so grateful for all the resources you have.
Yeah, that is my online program, the Brain Fog Recovery Program. Yeah, and we help people with mild cognitive impairment. We have the ladies that are talking about perimenopause and menopause where they feel like their brain is not working well. We have Parkinson's, we have early Alzheimer's with support people, and we have people with serious mental illness and everything in between. It's a comprehensive brain health program. And so it works really well for people.
Amazing. Well, you are the best, like I said, and so grateful for everything that you're doing and for getting this information out to so many people. I know it's making a huge difference in individuals' lives, and those numbers just keep going up and up and up. And so, thank you so very much, Nicole, for everything you do, and thank you for taking time to be on our show again today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Casey. I'll always come on your show. I love your show.
You're the best. Thank you so much. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.